When I decided to give my husband, George, a surprise at the office, I never imagined what I would find. Upon arriving, the security guard blocked my path and said, looking confused, "Wait, you are definitely not Mr. Miller's wife. I see her every day." By the way, do I? Before I could respond, I saw a younger woman stepping out of the elevator. The guard greeted her with a nod and finished his thought. "See you tomorrow, ma'am. Same time as always, right?" My heart raced. I was in shock when I saw who it was. But before continuing, check if you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. It was an ordinary October day when my life turned upside down. I had woken up early, prepared coffee for George, just as I had done for the last 4 decades, and watched him leave for work in his impeccable navy blue suit. After so much time together, our routine was like a calm river, predictable, without big surprises, or at least that's what I thought. That morning, while tidying our bedroom, I found a crumpled card in the pocket of the jacket George had worn the day before. It was for the 40th anniversary of the company where he worked. I smiled, thinking about how I could surprise him. I hadn't visited his office in a long time. The idea came naturally. I would bring him his favorite treats from the neighborhood bakery and show up unannounced. Our marriage had been a little lukewarm lately, with George arriving later and later and always tired. Perhaps a romantic gesture was exactly what we needed to rekindle that flame that seemed to be fading. I spent the rest of the morning getting ready with care. I put on my best floral dress, the one George always said brought out my eyes. I pulled my graying hair back into an elegant bun and even applied some red lipstick, something I rarely did in recent years. The bakery was just a few blocks from our house. I bought a box of the dark chocolate truffles that George loved so much. The clerk wrapped them in elegant paper with a gold ribbon. Perfect, I thought, imagining the look of surprise on my husband's face. The company building was imposing, all glass and concrete, located in the financial district of the city. George had worked there for over 30 years, starting as a simple assistant and working his way up to senior management. I was very proud of his trajectory, of his dedication. He always said that everything he did was for us, for our family, for our future. When I arrived at the building, my heart was beating fast with the anticipation of the surprise. I entered the main lobby and headed to the front desk. A middle-aged security guard with the name Mr. Evans on his badge was at the counter. "Good morning. I would like to visit my husband, George Miller. He is the director of the finance department." The guard looked me up and down with a curious expression. "Do you have any identification, ma'am?" It seemed strange to me. I had been there other times, though not recently. Perhaps it was a new procedure. I took my driver's license out of my purse and handed it to him. "Helen Miller," he read aloud and then looked at me with narrowed eyes. "You say you are Mr. Miller's wife?" "Yes, we've been married for 40 years, I replied, starting to feel uncomfortable with his tone. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. "I know Mr. Miller's wife. She comes here almost every day. I thought it must be some kind of confusion. Maybe he was thinking of another person, another Miller. There must be some mistake." "George Miller, finance director, 62 years old," I insisted, my voice now betraying my uncertainty. The guard pointed toward the elevator exit. "Wait, you can see for yourself. Look, here comes Mrs. Miller now." I turned in the indicated direction and saw an elegant woman stepping out of the elevator. She must have been about 45, with perfectly styled brown hair, wearing a navy blue executive dress very similar to the shade of George's suits. She walked with confidence, as if she belonged there. "Good morning, Mr. Evans," she said as she passed the reception. "I'm going out for lunch. Please let George know I'll be back at 2. "Certainly, Mrs. Miller. Have a good lunch," the guard replied with familiarity. I stood paralyzed, unable to move as she passed right by me without even noticing me. The box of truffles almost slipped from my trembling hands. When I finally managed to find my voice, she had already left the building. Who is that woman?" I asked, my voice choked. "That is Claire Miller, the finance director's wife," he replied, now looking at me with a mix of confusion and pity. "Are you sure we are talking about the same person?" My mind was trying to process what was happening. How could there be 2 wives of George? Was it some kind of terrible mistake, or was my world about to collapse? "I need to see him," I said, my voice almost a whisper. I'm very sorry, but without prior authorization, I cannot let you up, the guard said, now visibly uncomfortable with the situation. At that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't leave without discovering the truth. I understand, I said, trying to regain my composure. Actually, I came for an interview in the Human Resources Department. Can you tell me where that is? The guard seemed relieved to change the subject and pointed me toward the 3rd floor. I thanked him and headed to the elevator, but as soon as the doors closed, I pressed the button for the 8th floor where the executive offices were. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. 4 decades of marriage, 2 children raised together, a whole life shared. How was it possible that there was another woman presenting herself as George's wife? What else could he be hiding from me? The elevator reached the 8th floor, and the doors opened to a quiet, elegant hallway. I knew where George's office was. I had been there a few times for holiday parties and company celebrations. I walked slowly, trying not to make noise with my shoes on the marble floor. When I reached the door that had a gold plaque with the name George Miller, Director of Finance, I stopped. Through the frosted glass, I could see his silhouette sitting at his desk, apparently concentrated on some document. I was about to turn the handle when I heard voices approaching. I quickly hid behind a large potted plant in the hallway. "Is George in his office?" asked a man I recognized as Charles, one of George's oldest colleagues at the firm. "Yes, but I think he's busy right now," the secretary replied. "It's quick. I just need him to sign these documents before his lunch with Claire." My whole body tensed upon hearing that name. Charles entered the office without knocking. From where I was, I could hear fragments of the conversation. Lunch with Claire. George's voice sounded familiar and strange at the same time. "Yes, she just left. She said she'd meet you at the usual restaurant." My vision blurred, tears misting my eyes. Almost 4 decades of marriage. 2 children raised together, now adults with their own families. A house built with mutual sacrifice, thousands of dinners prepared, clothes washed, birthdays celebrated, and all this time there was another woman. I couldn't contain myself. I came out of my hiding place and entered the office without knocking. George and Charles turned toward me, surprised. The expression on my husband's face changed from surprise to horror in seconds. "Helen," he said, rising from his chair as if he had received an electric shock. What are you doing here?" The box of truffles fell from my trembling hands, scattering chocolates across the floor. "Who is Claire Miller, George?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. Charles looked from George to me, clearly uncomfortable. "I think you two need to talk," he murmured, quickly leaving the office and closing the door behind him. We stood there, face to face, husband and wife, like strangers. I barely recognized the man in front of me, not because he had changed physically, but because I realized I might never have really known him. "I was going to tell you," he began, his voice almost pleading. "Helen, please, sit down. It's not what you're thinking." "And what am I thinking, George?" I asked, remaining standing. "That my husband has another wife? That he lives a double life? That every night he spent working late in recent years was a lie?" He ran his hands through his graying hair, a gesture I knew so well after so many years together. It was what he did when he was nervous, when he felt cornered, Claire and I. "It's complicated," he finally said. "Complicated," I repeated, feeling the anger grow inside me. "Complicated is discovering your husband has another family after 40 years of marriage." George went around the desk and tried to approach, but I backed away. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice trembling. "Just tell me the truth. I want to hear it from you." He sighed deeply, his shoulders sagging as if carrying an immense weight. "I met Claire 15 years ago on a business trip to Miami," he began. "It was a relationship that shouldn't have happened, but it did. When I realized it, I was already too involved to simply end it." "And when exactly did you plan to tell me?" I asked, feeling every word like a knife cutting my throat. "I tried many times, Helen, but how do you tell the woman with whom you built a life that you made the biggest mistake a man can make? How do you destroy our family, our children, our grandchildren? So, your solution was to live 2 lives for 15 years? His silence was answer enough. I felt dizzy, as if the world were spinning around me. I needed to hold onto the edge of the desk to keep from falling. "Children. Do you have children with her?" I asked, dreading the answer. George looked down. A daughter. She is 14 years old. The blow was devastating. A daughter the age of our grandchildren, a whole family built parallel to ours. How could you hide this for so long? I asked, more to myself than to him. The business trips, the nights away, the busy weekends. Helen, please. He tried to approach again. Let's go home. We can talk. I can explain everything. Explain? There is no explanation for this, George. There is no justification for 15 years of lies. At that moment, the door opened and she entered. Claire Miller, my husband's other wife. She stopped upon seeing us, her expression shifting from surprise to recognition. You must be Helen, she said simply. What shocked me most was not her beauty or her youth. It was the absence of guilt or shame in her voice. She knew about me all this time. She knew. It was too much for me. Without saying a word, I grabbed my purse and walked out of the office, passing right by Claire, as if she were just another piece of furniture. I heard George shout my name as he ran down the hallway, but I didn't look back. In the elevator, alone, I finally let the tears fall. They weren't tears of sadness, I realize now, but of anger. Anger for having been deceived, for having believed in a man who lived a lie for so long, for having dedicated my life to someone who didn't deserve even my consideration. When I left the building, the autumn sun blinded me momentarily. The world out there continued the same, but I was irrevocably changed. The woman who entered that building with a box of chocolates and dreams of rekindling a marriage no longer existed. In her place was a 60-year-old woman who had just discovered that her entire life had been built on an illusion and now needed to decide what to do with the pieces. The way home was the longest of my life. I didn't take a taxi or a bus. I simply walked aimlessly, trying to process what had happened. The city streets I knew so well seemed strange now, as if I were in a completely different place. People passed by me living their normal lives, talking, laughing, rushing to appointments. How could they keep going when my world had just collapsed? How could the sun keep shining? I ended up sitting on a park bench watching children playing on the playground. I thought of my own children, now adults with their own families. I thought of the daughter George had with Claire, a teenager who probably knew me only as the other woman, if she knew of my existence at all. The irony of it made me let out a bitter laugh that startled an elderly lady sitting on the bench next to me. My cell phone rang several times. It was George, of course. I turned off the device and shoved it to the bottom of my purse. What could he say now that would change anything? What magic words would explain 15 years of betrayal? When I finally decided to return home, it was already getting dark. I unlocked the door and entered the apartment where we had lived for over 30 years. Every corner of that place held memories. The sofa, where we watched movies together on Friday nights. The kitchen table where our children did their homework. The wall with family photos that recorded our lives together. Was it all real? Some part of that had been true. I went to the bedroom and opened George's closet. His suits perfectly aligned, his ties organized by color, his ironed shirts. With a sudden movement, I yanked everything off the hangers and threw it on the floor. I opened drawers and scattered their contents onto the bed. I was searching for what exactly? More proof of his betrayal? Or perhaps a magical explanation that would transform everything into a terrible confusion? It was then that I found, in the back of a sock drawer, a small wooden box locked with a key. I had never seen it before. I looked for the key but didn't find it. In a fit of rage, I took a letter opener from the nightstand and forced the lock until it gave way. Inside were documents, a lease for an apartment on the other side of the city, bank statements for an account I didn't know about, and photos, many photos. George with Claire, George with a little girl who grew in each photo his other daughter, George on beaches, in restaurants, at birthday parties. A whole life documented in images, a parallel life to the one we lived together. I sat on the floor amidst the mess I had created and cried. I don't know how long I was there, but when I lifted my head, it was late at night, and I heard the front door open. George was home. "Helen?" he called, his voice echoing through the apartment. "Are you here?" I didn't answer. I heard his hesitant footsteps approaching the bedroom. When he opened the door and saw me there, sitting on the floor amidst his scattered clothes with the open box and the photos around me, his face went pale. "So this is it," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "This is your real life. Helen, can I explain?" "No," I interrupted, standing up with difficulty. My knees hurt. How long had I been sitting there? There is no explanation. There is only the truth, George. And the truth is that you built a whole life separate from me. While I took care of our home, raised our children, grew old waiting for you every night, you were with her, building a family, having another daughter. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking suddenly very old and tired. How was it supposed to happen then? I asked. Did you plan to tell me someday, or did you hope I would never find out? That I would die without knowing my husband lived a lie? I wanted to tell you, he insisted. Many times I was on the verge of saying everything. But then I thought about how it would destroy you, how it would affect our children, our grandchildren. No, I cut in. Don't use our family as an excuse. You didn't think about us when you started that other marriage. You thought only of yourself. George lowered his head, defeated. What are you going to do now? He asked finally. It was a good question. What would I do at 60, after dedicating my entire life to this man, to this marriage? What was left for me? I want you to leave, I said, the words coming out of me as if from someone else. Now, Helen, please, let's talk. I can explain everything. We can resolve this. Resolve? I repeated incredulously. Do you think there is something to resolve here? You have another wife, George, another family, a teenage daughter. There is no resolution for this. Claire isn't my wife, he said quickly. Not legally. We never married. That was supposed to make me feel better, that he hadn't officially married her, just lived a sham. Get out, I repeated, pointing to the door. Go to your other apartment, to your other family. I don't want to see you right now. George seemed to want to say something else, but changed his mind. He picked up some clothes from the floor, put them in a small suitcase, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. I'm sorry, Helen. I never wanted to hurt you. I almost laughed. He never wanted to hurt me, but he lived a lie for 15 years. I didn't answer, and he finally left, closing the door behind him. As soon as I was alone, the enormity of what had happened hit me with full force. My marriage was over. Not only that, perhaps it had never been real, at least not in the last 15 years. I picked up my cell phone and called my daughter, Anna. She answered on the third ring. Mom? Are you okay? It's late. I wanted to tell everything, to vent, to cry with her, but the words didn't come out. How do I tell my daughter her father had another family? How do I destroy the image she had of him? Everything is fine, I lied. I just wanted to hear your voice. Something happened, she said, always perceptive. Is it Dad? No, honey. Everything is fine, really. We'll talk tomorrow, okay? After hanging up, I stared at the phone. I would have to tell my children eventually. They had a right to know, but not today. I couldn't go through that today. I took a long, hot bath, trying to wash away all the pain and confusion. I lay in our bed and tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come. My mind was filled with images of George with Claire, George with his other daughter, George living his other life while I, innocent, waited at home. The next morning, I woke up after a brief, restless sleep and realized I needed to make decisions. First, I called a locksmith and changed all the locks on the apartment. Then I called my lawyer, a woman I had known for years from our book club. Marissa, I need your professional help, I said when she answered. I want to file for divorce. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Helen, are you sure? What happened? I'm sure, I replied firmly. Can I tell you the details in person? We arranged a meeting for that afternoon at her office. Then I did something I had been putting off. I called my children and asked them to come to the apartment that evening. I had to tell them in person. The day passed like a foggy dream. I tidied the bedroom, putting away the clothes George had scattered the night before. I separated the photos I had found and put them in an envelope. They would be evidence for the divorce, but I didn't want my children to see them. In the meeting with Marissa, I told her everything. She listened, without interrupting, making occasional notes. It is a clear case of abandonment and adultery, she said when I finished. You are entitled to half of everything, including his pension, 401, and considering the circumstances, we can request alimony, money. It was so strange to think about that now. Throughout our married life, George handled the finances. I had my own salary as a teacher, now my small pension, but he always managed the big money, the investments, the future. I just want what is fair, I said. And I want it to be quick. When I left Marissa's office, I felt strangely lighter. Making a decision, acting, gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since I walked into that office building the day before. That evening, Anna and Luke, my 2 children, arrived almost at the same time. Both looked worried. "Mom, what is going on?" asked Anna as soon as they entered. "We tried to talk to Dad all day, but he's not answering. And you sounded strange on the phone." "Sit down," I asked, indicating the sofa. "I have something to tell you." And so I told them. Not every detail. I didn't show the photos, but I said the essential part. Their father had another family for 15 years. Another woman, a teenage daughter, an apartment on the other side of the city. Their faces went from disbelief to shock, and finally to anger. Luke, always the more explosive one, stood up and began pacing the living room. "I'm going to kill him," he said, his voice trembling. "How could he do this to you, Mom?" Anna cried silently, holding my hand. "I can't believe it. Dad was always so present, so much a family man." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Present? He always worked late. He traveled constantly. He spent weekends solving problems for the firm. Luke stopped pacing and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "It's true. How did we not notice this? How did we not see the signs?" "Because he was careful," I replied. "And because none of us wanted to see. We stayed up talking late into the night. They wanted to know everything. When did it start? How did I find out? Who was this woman?" I told them what I knew, what I had seen. "What are you going to do now, Mom?" asked Anna finally. "I am going to move on," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I already spoke to a lawyer. I am going to file for divorce." "And us?" asked Luke. "How should we deal with him?" It was a difficult question. As furious as they were, George was still their father. I didn't want to come between them and their relationship with their dad. "That is between you and him," I replied honestly. "He made terrible mistakes as a husband, but that doesn't erase the years he spent as a father. You need to decide for yourselves how you want to handle this." When they finally left, with promises to return the next day, I was once again alone in the quiet apartment. But this time the silence didn't seem so oppressive. There was a strange peace in the truth. Even a painful truth. Lying in bed, I thought about how my life had changed completely in just 24 hours. Yesterday I was a devoted wife, living what I believed to be a long marriage, even if perhaps a little lukewarm. Today I was a betrayed woman about to divorce at 60. What awaited me now? For the first time since leaving that office building, I allowed myself to think about the future, not just the next few days or weeks, but the years to come. I would have to learn to live alone, to make my own decisions, to rebuild my identity beyond George's wife. It was terrifying, but I also realized with surprise, it was a little exciting. The next morning, I woke up to my cell phone ringing. It was George again. This time I answered. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "We need to talk, Helen," he said, sounding exhausted. "There are things you need to know, explanations I deserve to give you. I saw enough in the photos, George." "There is nothing to explain. Please," he implored. "A coffee, a public place. Just give me that chance." I thought about refusing, hanging up on him, but maybe there were questions only he could answer. Questions that would haunt me for the rest of my life if I didn't get answers now. 1 hour. I agreed, finally. At the bookstore cafe at 11. He seemed relieved. "I'll be there." "Thank you, Helen." I hung up without answering and stared at the ceiling. Was I doing the right thing? Maybe, but not for him, for me. I needed to understand how all that had happened right under my nose. I dressed with care, choosing a simple but elegant dress and a pair of earrings I had bought for myself on my 60th birthday. I pulled my hair back and put on some light lipstick. I didn't want to look defeated. The cafe was a few blocks from home. When I arrived, George was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a day. His eyes were marked by deep circles, and he hadn't shaved. I sat across from him without saying anything. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I didn't come for you," I cut in. I came because I need to understand how you could do this. He nodded slowly. It's fair, and I'm going to tell you everything, without lies this time. For the next hour, George spoke. He told how he met Claire on a business trip to Miami 15 years ago. She was an executive assistant for one of the directors with whom he was negotiating a merger. He spoke about how the relationship started as something casual that should have ended when he returned home. But I didn't end it, he said, eyes fixed on the coffee cup in front of him. We kept talking, and when I went back to Miami 3 months later, we met again. And so it began, I muttered, feeling a dull ache in my chest. Yes. At first, it was just physical, a fling, something I knew was wrong but couldn't stop. Then she told me she was pregnant. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control the wave of anger and betrayal that washed over me. I panicked, George continued. I thought about telling you everything, asking for forgiveness, taking responsibility for the child, but continuing our marriage. But I didn't have the courage. Then Claire suggested a solution. She wouldn't ask anything of me. She would raise the child alone if I helped her financially. How convenient, I said, my voice laden with bitterness. At the beginning, it was like that. I sent money, visited occasionally, but when Lucy was born, he paused, his voice choked. When I saw her for the first time, something changed. She was my daughter, Helen. I couldn't just walk away. So, you decided to have 2 families, I completed. It wasn't a conscious decision, it just happened little by little. A visit here, a weekend there. Claire got a job in Jersey City, at the same firm's branch. The situation evolved. For 15 years, I observed, and at no point in those 15 years did you think I deserved to know the truth. George finally raised his eyes and faced me. Many times, especially when the kids left home and it was just the 2 of us. But then I thought, why destroy what we had? Why cause you that pain? It was selfishness on my part, I know that now. Selfishness, I repeated. That's an interesting word to describe what you did. We sat in silence for a moment. A young waitress approached to ask if we wanted more coffee. George nodded, yes. I shook my head. How did you manage to hide it for so long? I asked when she walked away. All those trips, late nights at the office. In the beginning, they really were business trips. Only Claire went with me. When she came to Jersey City, I rented the apartment for them, and over time it became easier to lie. One lie led to another, and at the office. Everyone knew. George looked away, and I realized I had touched a sore spot. Some closer colleagues, yes, Charles, obviously, and some other directors. I asked everyone for discretion, and they kept your dirty little secret for years, I said with disdain, while I was the idiot who knew nothing. That wasn't how they saw it, Helen. That wasn't how I saw it. And how did you see it, George? How did you see me? He seemed truly disturbed now, hands trembling slightly as he lifted the cup to his lips. I loved you, Helen. I still love you. You are the mother of my children, my partner of decades. What I had with Claire was different. Ah, of course. The exciting adventure with the younger woman versus the comfort of the old wife at home. I said, unable to contain the sarcasm. It's not that. With you, I had history, roots, memories. With Claire, at first, it was just excitement, something new. Then Lucy came, and everything got complicated. I saw myself trapped between 2 worlds, unable to abandon either of them. Lucy, my mind fixed on that name. George's daughter, whom I never knew, who probably didn't even know of my existence. And the girl? Does she know about me? George hesitated. She knows I'm married, yes, but she doesn't know details. Claire thought it was better that way. Claire thought it was better, I repeated. And you always did what Claire thought was better, isn't that right? Helen, no, I interrupted, raising my hand. Enough. I've heard enough. I filed for divorce yesterday. My lawyer will be in contact with you. George paled. Divorce? But Helen, can we resolve this? I know I messed up. I messed up terribly. But we have 40 years together. Don't throw that away. We aren't, George. You threw that away when you decided to have 2 families. When you lied to me every day for 15 years. I stood up, taking my purse. We aren't in the 50 seconds anymore when women stayed with cheating husbands for lack of choice. I am 60 years old, yes, but I still have a life ahead of me, and I am not going to waste it with someone who betrayed me in this way. George stood up too, trying to hold my arm, but I pulled back. Helen, please, let's talk more. I can change. I can fix this. There is nothing to fix, I replied, surprisingly calm. It's over, George. I left the cafe without looking back, feeling a mix of pain and liberation. As I walked back home, I realized that for the first time since discovering the truth, I was breathing normally, as if a weight had been partially removed from my chest. What George had said didn't justify his actions. Nothing could justify them, but at least now I knew. The truth, however painful, was better than the doubt. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in a new routine. I began to deal with the practical aspects of the separation. I opened a new bank account to receive my pension, which previously went into our joint account. I asked Anna for help to better understand our finances. She worked as an accountant and knew much more about these things than I did. George tried to call me several times, but I only answered when it was about practical matters, documents he needed to retrieve from the apartment, things he had left behind. A week after our conversation at the cafe, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. Helen Miller? Asked a female voice when I answered. Yes. Who is speaking? I am Claire Peterson. We need to talk. My heart raced. The other woman, the other wife. For a moment I thought about hanging up, but curiosity was stronger. About what? I think you know. Please, it's important. Can we meet? I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to see her. Didn't want to give her any satisfaction. But another part needed to look her in the eyes, to understand who was the woman who had shared my husband with me for so many years. Okay, I agreed finally. Where? We agreed to meet at a small cafe in Midtown, far from both my apartment and George's office. Neutral territory. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wanted to be there first on purpose, to establish my presence. I chose a table in the back with my back to the wall, where I could see the door. Claire arrived punctually. I recognized her immediately, even though she was dressed more casually than the day I saw her at the office. She hesitated at the entrance, looking around until our eyes met. She walked to my table with a confidence I found irritating. Helen, she said, sitting across from me. Thank you for coming. Let's get straight to the point, I replied dryly. What do you want? She nodded, seeming to appreciate my frankness. I want to clarify some things. First, you should know that George never told me he would leave you. I never asked him to, and he never promised me that. And that is supposed to make me feel better? No, she replied, surprising me with her honesty. I just want you to understand the situation as it is, not as it might seem. And how is it, in your opinion? Complicated, she sighed. When I met George, he told me he was married. I was coming out of a difficult relationship. I didn't want anything serious. It was going to be a passing thing. But it wasn't. No. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought about disappearing, raising the child alone without involving George. But it wouldn't be fair to him or the baby. And was it fair to me? I asked, my voice betraying the emotion I was trying to control. Was it fair to keep me in ignorance for 15 years? Claire had the decency to look ashamed. No. And I feel guilty about that every day. But the situation evolved little by little. At first, George only visited us occasionally, sent money. Later, when I came to work in the city, it got complicated. Lucy wanted to see her father more often. She loves him, Helen. I took a deep breath. The mention of her daughter, their daughter, was still painful. Why are we having this conversation, Claire? What do you hope to achieve? She looked me straight in the eyes. I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you or destroy your marriage. And I want you to understand that Lucy is an innocent teenager in this situation. Whatever happens between you, George, and me, she is not to blame. I would never blame a child for the parent's mistakes, I replied, offended that she could think that of me. But that doesn't change the fact that you and George betrayed me for 15 years. You're right, she agreed. To my surprise, she added, we aren't the same. You are the legitimate wife, the woman with whom he built a life first. I am the other. I was always the other, Helen, no matter how much I tried to pretend otherwise. There was an unexpected vulnerability in her voice that disarmed me momentarily. What do you want now? I asked. George and I are going to divorce. He will be free to be with you officially, if that is what you both want. For years I lived in this strange arrangement, convincing myself it was all okay, that it was normal to share the man I loved with another woman. Now that everything is out in the open, I don't know if I can continue. That is ironic, I observed. Now that he could be all yours, you aren't sure if you want him. The truth is complicated, she said with a sad smile. Maybe I fell in love not just with George, but with the situation, the drama, the secrecy. Now that that is over, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for her despite everything. What kind of life was that, being eternally the second choice? And Lucy? I asked. How is she dealing with all this? It's being hard on her. George was always a present father within the limitations of our situation. Now she is confused, afraid of losing him. She won't lose him, I stated, surprised by my own certainty. George isn't a good husband, clearly, but he was always a dedicated father to my children. I don't believe it will be different with her. Claire seemed genuinely grateful for my words. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. We sat in silence for a moment. Two women linked by a man who had betrayed us in different ways. What are you going to do now? Asked Claire finally. Move on, I replied. I am 60 years old. It isn't the end of life, even if for a moment it seemed so. I have my pension, my children, my grandchildren. I have friends I haven't seen in years because I was always busy being the perfect wife. Maybe it's time to rediscover who I am beyond Helen, George's wife. You seem stronger than I expected, she commented. I am stronger than I expected myself, I admitted. The pain hasn't disappeared. I doubt it will ever disappear completely, but I won't let it define the rest of my life. When we said goodbye, we weren't friends, we never could be. But there was a mutual understanding. Two women who had been deceived in different ways by the same man. Walking home after our meeting, I realized I was breathing more freely than I had in weeks. The conversation with Claire had given me something unexpected. Perspective. I wasn't the only victim in this story. There was a woman who lived in the shadow of my marriage for 15 years, and a girl who only knew her father in stolen visits. In a way, we all lost. The following months were an emotional roller coaster. The divorce process moved forward, with George trying at every moment to convince me to give up. He would show up at the apartment with flowers, gifts, promises of change. In a particularly pathetic moment, he even suggested we could keep things as they were since I now knew the truth. How can you think I would accept staying married to you knowing you have another family? I asked incredulously. Many couples have arrangements, he replied without looking me in the eyes. This isn't an arrangement, George. It is a betrayal, and I deserve more than that. My children were furious with their father. Luke refused to even answer his calls, while Anna maintained contact only out of obligation. The revelation of Lucy's existence, a half-sister they never knew, was especially painful for both. How could he hide this from us? Anna asked one day, crying in my lap like when she was a child. We have a 14-year-old sister we never met. Your father made many mistakes, I replied, stroking her hair. But that girl is innocent. One day, when you are ready, maybe you will want to meet her. Do you really believe that? Asked Luke, who was sitting on the other side of the room. After everything he did? Yes, I replied honestly. She is your blood, and she isn't to blame for the choices the adults around her made. They reflected on my words, and I saw in their eyes a mix of anger, confusion, and perhaps a hint of curiosity. Amidst all this emotional chaos, something unexpected began to happen. I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten. I went back to painting, a hobby I had abandoned when the kids were born. I enrolled in a photography course I always wanted to take. I reconnected with old friends. I started attending a book club. Every little discovery, every new activity, was like recovering a piece of me that had been lost over the years. Not because George had forbidden me to do those things he never did, but because somehow I had reduced myself to the role of wife, mother, grandmother. I had forgotten that I was also Helen, a woman with desires, ambitions, and interests of her own. 6 months after that fateful visit to George's office, the divorce was finalized. The division of assets was surprisingly simple. George didn't contest anything, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of exhaustion. I received half of everything, including the apartment where we lived. He kept the beach house we rarely used. The day I signed the final papers, my lawyer congratulated me. "You are going to be okay, Helen," she said, squeezing my hand. "Financially, everything is sorted. And emotionally, well, that comes with time." "I'm already better than I expected," I confessed. "Every day is a little easier." That night, when I arrived home, my home now solely mine, there was a huge bouquet of flowers at the door. My first thought was that it was from George, another desperate attempt at reconciliation. But the card read, "To the strongest woman we know. With love, Anna, Luke, Mary, John, and Peter, my children and grandchildren, my true family." I entered the apartment, put the flowers in a vase, and poured myself a glass of wine. Sitting on the balcony, looking at the city lights, I reflected on the incredible journey of the last few months. At 60, I had discovered a devastating betrayal, faced the end of my marriage of 4 decades, and been forced to rebuild my life from scratch. It would have been easy to fall apart, to allow myself to be consumed by bitterness and resentment. Instead, I was discovering a new version of myself, a Helen who didn't need a man's approval or love to define herself, a woman who could be alone without feeling lonely. The future was still uncertain. There would be difficult days ahead, days when the pain of betrayal would return with full force, days when I would miss the life I had or thought I had. But there were also infinite possibilities, the opportunity to discover who I really was, to live on my own terms, to create new memories, untainted by lies. My cell phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Anna. "Did you like the flowers?" she asked when I answered. "They are beautiful, sweetheart." "Thank you, Mom. We are all here at Luke's house. We're celebrating Peter's 6th birthday. Do you want to come? We can send an Uber to pick you up." I hesitated for just a second. "Of course. Give me half an hour to get ready." I hung up the phone with a smile. This was my life now. Imperfect, unexpected, but mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited to see what would come next. A year passed since that fateful day I discovered George's double life. A year of pain, discoveries, tears, and surprisingly, laughter. Today, at 61, I am a different woman from the one who entered that office building with a box of chocolates, hoping to surprise her husband. That naive Helen was left behind, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unexpectedly happier. The changes started small. First, I redecorated the apartment, removing traces of George. Paintings he chose were replaced by works I loved. The brown sofa he insisted matched everything gave way to a comfortable set in shades of blue. I transformed his office into a painting studio where I spend hours lost in colors and textures. My children adapted to the new reality over time. Anna was the first to extend an olive branch to her father, not for him, but for Lucy. She wanted to meet her half-sister, this teenager who shared her blood without knowing of her existence. "She's smart," Anna told me after the first meeting, "and shy. She seems lost in all this, as if she doesn't know her place." "It's understandable," I replied. Suddenly she discovers she has adult siblings, that her father had another family. It must be confusing. Luke took longer to accept the idea of meeting Lucy, but eventually he came around. His wife, always sensible, convinced him that the girl wasn't to blame. "She looks like Grandpa," Luke told me later, referring to my father. "She has the same crooked smile." It was strange to hear that, but not painful, as it would have been months earlier. It was just a fact. That girl, whom I never knew, carried traits of my family along with George's. As for Claire, we maintained a distant respect. Our paths rarely crossed, and when they did, usually at events related to my grandchildren where George was also present, we exchanged polite greetings and nothing more. George tried several times for a reconciliation, even after the divorce was finalized. He would show up with gifts, invite me to dinner, talk about second chances and forgiveness. To every attempt, my answer was the same. "There is no going back, George. What we had is over." The most surprising thing for me was discovering that this was true. There was no going back. Not because I couldn't forgive him, although it would be difficult to imagine how, but because I didn't love him anymore. The love I felt for him for decades had died, not dramatically, but gradually, like a plant that stops receiving water and light. In its place grew something unexpected: self-love. I learned to value my own company, to make choices based solely on what I wanted, without considering someone else's preferences. I traveled alone for the first time in my life. A small cruise to the Caribbean that I always wanted to do, but George always considered too expensive or pointless. Sitting on the deck, watching the open sea, I felt a freedom I had never experienced. I made new friends in the photography course and the book club, people with similar interests who didn't know me, just as George's wife or Anna and Luke's mother. To them, I was just Helen, the amateur photographer with a peculiar eye for details, the avid reader of historical novels. And then, 9 months after the divorce, something happened that I would never have expected. I met someone. Robert was a retired history professor, a widower for 5 years. We met at the opening of a local photography exhibition where we both had work displayed. He photographed urban landscapes. I preferred to portray people. "Your photos capture something special," he commented, stopping beside me while I looked at one of my images. An elderly lady selling flowers at a market, her dignity, even in simple circumstances. We talked for hours that night about photography, literature, travel, music. We didn't talk about ex-spouses or children. Those subjects came later, naturally, when we were already friends. Our relationship evolved slowly, organically. Coffee after photography classes, lunches discussing books, a walk in the park on a sunny Sunday. There was no rush, no expectations. Just two mature people with full and independent lives, discovering the pleasure of each other's company. The first time he kissed me was after a classical music concert, a light, almost shy kiss that made me feel like a teenager again. I laughed at that, at the idea that at 61 I could feel like a love-struck girl, and he laughed with me. "What's so funny?" he asked. "Us," I replied. "Two old folks behaving like teenagers." "Old folks?" He feigned indignation. "Speak for yourself. I am in my prime," and in many ways, he was right. We were both in our prime, not of youth, certainly, but of wisdom, of self-confidence, of self-knowledge. When I told Anna and Luke about Robert, their reactions were predictable. Initial worry: would he be a gold digger? Was I emotionally ready? Followed by cautious support. When they finally met him at a Sunday lunch, the approval was unanimous. "He looks at you like you are the most precious thing in the world, Mom," Anna commented later. And maybe that was what charmed me most about Robert, not just how he looked at me, but how he made me feel valued, heard, seen, not as an extension of someone, but as a whole person. George found out about Robert through the kids. His reaction was a mix of disbelief and jealousy. "You're already dating someone?" he asked when we met to settle some final details about the sale of a joint property. "Don't you think you're moving too fast?" "Too fast?" I repeated incredulously. "We have been divorced for almost a year, George, and you have had another family for 15. I think I am within an acceptable time frame." He had no answer for that. As for Claire and George, I heard from Anna that they were still together, but things were complicated. Now that there was no more secret, now that he could be with her openly, it seemed something had been lost. The forbidden fruit was no longer so tempting. "Dad seems lost," Anna confided in me once, "as if he doesn't know his place anymore." I felt a pang of pity for him, an emotion that surprised me. George had built a life based on lies, and now that they had crumbled, he no longer knew who he was or what he wanted. In contrast, I had never felt so sure of my place in the world. At 61, I was discovering a new version of myself. Not an alternative Helen, but the Helen who always existed beneath the roles of wife, mother, grandmother. The Helen who was an artist, photographer, reader, traveler, friend, lover. On a Sunday afternoon, a year and 2 months after the discovery that changed my life, I was at home preparing dinner. Robert would come later, as would Anna and her family. Luke called to say he couldn't come. His youngest son had a fever, but he promised to show up the next weekend. While cutting vegetables for the salad, I stopped for a moment and looked around. My redecorated apartment, the walls covered with my photographs and paintings, the table set for the people I loved. The feeling that washed over me was one of deep gratitude. Not for George's betrayal, I would never be grateful for that, but for the life I discovered after it, for the strength I didn't know I had, for the new beginnings I never imagined possible. My cell phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Robert. "I'm leaving the house now," he said. Do you need anything on the way? Just you, I replied, surprised by the ease with which the words came out. His laugh warmed my heart. I'm on my way. Then I hung up the phone and went back to cutting the vegetables. A smile lingered on my lips. I never imagined that at 61 I would be cooking for a new love, feeling that flutter in my stomach of waiting for someone special. The doorbell rang precisely at 6. Robert was punctual like a Swiss watch, a trait I learned to appreciate. I opened the door, and there he was. Gray hair, perfectly cut, warm brown eyes, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. My favorite flower for the most talented photographer in the city, he said, handing me the flowers. You're gonna make me believe the hype, I replied, accepting the bouquet and standing on tiptoes to kiss him. Robert also brought a bottle of red wine and an old album he had found in a second-hand bookstore. From the 50 Seconds, About Street Photography. I thought you might get inspired. These small gestures, noticing my interests, remembering details, were what enchanted me most about him. George rarely noticed those things in the last years of our marriage. Anna arrived half an hour later with her husband and her 2 children. My grandchildren ran to Robert, who welcomed them with hugs and the peppermint candies he always kept in his pockets, especially for them. There was no awkwardness, no tension. It was as if he had always been part of the family. During dinner, between laughter and stories, I realized I had found something I never expected to have again: genuine happiness. It wasn't a perfect happiness or without scratches. There were still moments of pain when I remembered the betrayal. I still had occasional dreams where I found George and Claire together, but it was real. 2 days later, I received an unexpected call from Luke. "Mom, you have to come to the hospital. It's Dad." My heart raced. What happened? He had a heart attack. We don't know if it's serious yet. I stayed silent for a moment, processing the news. Despite everything, George had been part of my life for more than 4 decades. Father of my children, grandfather of my grandchildren. I'm on my way, I replied finally. In the hospital, I found Luke in the waiting room. Anna arrived moments later, eyes red and swollen. "Any news?" I asked. "He is stable now." "The doctors say it was a warning, not as serious as it could have been." We sat together waiting for more information. That was when I saw her, Claire, rushing into the waiting room, a dark-haired teenager by her side. Lucy, I recognized immediately, having never met her before. The same eyes as George, the same face shape as my children. There was a moment of tension. When our eyes met, Anna got up and went to them, hugging her half-sister briefly. Luke remained seated, uncomfortable. Claire approached me hesitantly. "Helen," she greeted me, clearly unsure how to act. "Claire," I replied with a nod. Then I looked at the girl beside her. "And you must be Lucy." She nodded shyly. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." "The pleasure is mine," I replied honestly. It was a surreal situation. George's 2 families gathered in a hospital waiting room. In other times, it would have been unbearable. Now, although strange, it was just another chapter in this complicated story we had become. When we were finally allowed to see George, we went in shifts. First Anna and Luke, then Claire and Lucy. I hesitated. Should I see him? What would I say to him? "He asked for you," Anna told me when she returned. "I think he would like to see you." I took a deep breath and entered the room. George was pale, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him, connected to monitors and wearing an oxygen mask. "Helen," he said, voice weak, removing the mask momentarily. "You came?" "Of course I came," I replied, stopping beside the bed. The kids were worried. "And you?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Were you worried?" It was a loaded question. I thought carefully before answering. "Yes, George. Despite everything, I don't wish you any harm." He nodded slowly, seeming to accept my answer. "You know," he said after a moment, "when you're about to die, they say your life flashes before your eyes." "You aren't dying," I interrupted. "No, not this time," he agreed. "But for a moment I thought I was. And you know what I saw? Our first years together, when we were young and everything seemed possible. When the kids were little and we ran through the park on Sundays. I felt a wave of nostalgia. Those were good times before the lies, before the betrayal. "George, don't." "Let me finish," he asked. I ruined everything, Helen. Our family, our life, out of selfishness, out of weakness. And the worst part is that now I have nothing, neither you nor really Claire. We are together, but it isn't the same. It never was. What are you saying? He sighed deeply, the sound punctuated by a small groan of pain. I'm saying you were right to move on. And I was wrong about everything, absolutely everything. It wasn't a request for reconciliation, I realized. It was just a confession. A man looking back on his life and acknowledging his mistakes. You have Lucy, I replied softly. She needs you. Yes, he agreed. And I'm going to try to be better for her than I was for you or the boys. When I left the room, I felt as if a weight had been lifted. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough to breathe easier. Claire was in the hallway looking out the window. I approached her, surprising myself. He is going to be fine, I said. He is too stubborn to give up now. She gave a small smile. Yes, he is. Take care of him, I added, and of Lucy. She seems like a good girl. I will take care, she promised, and she is. A great kid. I left the hospital that day with a strange sense of closure. No? Forgiveness? Exactly. Some things are too hard to forgive completely, but acceptance. The past was past. It couldn't be changed, only accepted and eventually left behind. When I arrived home, I called Robert and told him about George's heart attack. He offered to come over immediately, but I said I needed some time alone. I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the night sky. I thought about all the turns life takes, about the unexpected paths we are forced to walk. Who could imagine that the most painful discovery of my life, my husband's decades-long betrayal, would end up leading me to a more authentic and happy version of myself? I wasn't grateful for the pain, but I was grateful for the growth that came after it, for the strength I discovered in me, for the new possibilities that opened up when I was forced to rebuild my life from scratch. 2 months after the scare with George, I organized a lunch at my apartment. I invited Anna and her family, Luke and his, and to everyone's surprise, I also invited Lucy, not Claire. There were limits to how much I could evolve, but the girl, that innocent young woman who shared my children's blood, deserved the chance to know her half-siblings in a more relaxed environment. It was a surprisingly pleasant afternoon. Lucy was shy at first, but soon loosened up upon discovering she shared a love for music with Anna and for video games with Luke's oldest son. She's cool, my grandson Peter commented later. Can I call her aunt even though she's younger than me? You can call her whatever you want, I replied, smiling. Families come in all shapes and sizes, and ours, I realized, had found a way to expand instead of breaking completely. The following week, Robert surprised me with a proposal, a 3-month trip through Europe. I always wanted to do a tour of the museums and historical sites, he explained, and I can't think of better company than yours. 3 months is a long time, I hesitated, and the kids, the grandkids, they have their own lives, he argued gently. And there are video calls. Besides, you spent decades taking care of everyone. Maybe it's time to live a little for yourself. To my own surprise, I agreed. We booked tickets, planned itineraries, made lists of must-see places. I, who had never traveled out of the country, was about to embark on an adventure through Europe at 61. On the eve of the trip, Anna and Luke organized a farewell dinner. Robert, of course, was there, as well as the grandkids and some close friends I had made in recent months. A toast, proposed Anna, raising her glass. To my mother, the strongest and bravest woman I know. To Helen, everyone repeated. Looking around the table, at the faces I loved, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Who would say that at 61, after a whole life built around a marriage that turned out to be a lie, I would be here loved, surrounded by family and friends, about to embark on an adventure? A toast, I replied, raising my own glass, to second chances and to discovering that it is never too late to start over. While everyone applauded and drank, my gaze met Robert's. His warm smile told me everything I needed to know, that this new journey, this new life I had found in the ashes of the old one, was just the beginning. At the airport the next morning, I hugged my children and grandchildren with tears in my eyes. I'll be back soon, I promised, and I'm going to send thousands of photos. Enjoy every minute, Mom, said Luke. You deserve it. Hand in hand with Robert, I walked toward the boarding gate, my heart full of anticipation. It wasn't the future I had planned. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself when I said I do to George more than 40 years ago. It was better, truer, more mine. And as the plane took off, taking me to unknown lands and unimaginable adventures, I realized that the greatest discovery of all had been the simplest one, that I was enough alone, by myself. That my identity didn't depend on being someone's wife or someone's mother. I was just Helen. And finally, after 61 years, I was really starting to get to know her. Now, if you liked this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments which part left your jaw on the floor. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to have access to exclusive videos that I don't post here. See you there.